Well, it is that time again. We are ready for some more mirror talk. And I had an interesting, I don't know, text from a friend. And it regarded um, an older person who had seen it's funny I say that older person thing, like that's not me. But anyway, she's older than I am and much wiser than I am, who had seen the podcast. And so it made me think, you know what? I should do a podcast dedicated to the wisdom of my elders. And so I'm going to call this one Mirror of Wisdom, is what I'm going to call this one. Mirror of Wisdom. And I want to say, first of all, to my young people out there, bless your little hearts. I just, I heart you the whole nine, but you all are missing out on the best of the best when you have shortchanged um, your grandparents and those older women at church and the older men at church who, those old deacons who, I don't know, used to do the devotion, or those ones that would get down on one knee and pray, or the mothers who would pray for you and, slip you a piece of peppermint from time to time. You've missed out if you have not spent time with them. And one of the things that, I don't know, it kind of bugged me when I was younger. So I remember the days of coming to Arkansas. Whew, to the country is what we called it when we lived in Chicago. And, I loved being with my grandmother. Now, let's not get that twisted. I did love doing that. And my great grandmother, who she was such a hoot. It just was that country life that threw me off. But anyway, the point was when we moved to Arkansas, I can remember my mother having to send for me because I, would sit under my great grandmother. She was in her 90s when I was, a teenager. And amazing, just smart things that I learned. And so now I look back at my life now and I think about a lot of times when people have come to me and they've asked me for advice or, or when I just got a, quick snapback on you, that comes from sitting under amazing women who knew well more than we'll ever know in our lifetimes. And so as I think about this mirror of wisdom, let me tell you a few things that I've learned from some of my, my season, if I would like to give them a beautiful name, my seasoned women in my life. One of the things I've learned is the power of silence. Now, one of the things, if you know me and if you know my Jones side of the family, silence is not something we do very well. But I have learned it from the women in my life. I watched my grandmothers and some of my older aunts when I was ready to like clap back real quick, like I got to snap back. Let's go. Come on, say it. I've watched them sit in silence and not say a word. And while I thought it was foolish at the time, I have learned over time the power of that silence and how they spoke volumes with nothing, and how it made a much greater impact on what they wanted done, which eventually got done, just by their silence. And so it took me quite a few years to get there, but I must admit I'm getting better. Like I'm pretty good at that silence thing, because sometimes when I'm ready to ruin your life and defeat your entire self-esteem, I remember the power of silence, and I will sit there and look at you dead in your eye, just like that, without a word. Or let me tell you another thing, because we all feel like, if somebody says something, or somebody texts me, or somebody says something on social media, or, they put this, so now I got to DM them, or they DM me, or they putting me out there, I got to put them back out there. You don't. You really don't. You just don't. Like I have told my nieces 1,000 times, times 1,000 times, it's your phone. So if someone says something to you on your phone, particularly via a text message, it's your phone. You don't have to reply. You know what you can do? Hit that delete button. Oh, I love the delete button. And if you send me something foolish that makes me need to scroll, oh, I'm definitely deleting you. Delete. And then you can just sit there and wonder what you think I'm thinking about, or if I really have moved on. But you can try and figure out, did she get the text? Did she not? Is she going to reply? Is she not? You worry about that. Me, I've moved on. And so the power of silence is amazing. That's one of the things I've learned. Another thing I've learned is patience. Let me tell you something. The mother that I know now, who is now a grandmother, is completely different from the mother who raised me. Grandparents are like pillars of patience. The thing that would have gotten you, teeth knocked out, quick clap back, an eye that would be like a laser that could slice you in half. All of that would have happened if it were you. But then you give them some grandkids, and all of a sudden they're patient out the wazoo. And so I know that because my grandmother, and both of my grandmothers and my great grandmother were super patient with me, ridiculously patient with me, because I was a hot mess as a child. Let me just tell you that. Hot mess. And so they loved me and hugged me and always, made me feel like whatever it is that I did, somebody gave me a reason for it, and so that justified it and made it okay. I mean, just patient out the wazoo. The grandkids are running all over the place. They're doing the most. They're screaming. They're just sitting there. You about to lose your mind. They're just sitting there. And so I did learn a great sense of patience from them, because I watched them. I watched them be patient with their spouses and with the grandkids and, with their siblings, very patient. And then another thing that I learned, was, now this is what I'm really not good at. There's a lot of work that I need to do in this area, but compassion. I mean, they're way unlike us. Very compassionate, very much long suffering built into them. Because I don't care how bad the neighbor down the street or the neighbor downstairs, or, depend on where you live, how bad they may have talked about them or, been mean to them. If they were ever in need, they did the right thing. They helped. If you were in need, they helped. And so that is not something that I have gotten really good at. I'm really working on it. I got a long way to go with that compassion thing, because I'm just like, you act crazy with me, I'm like, I cut you off, cut off, done. Don't even remember your name. And that's, not justifying it. It's wrong. Trust me. Let me say to myself in this mirror, Jackie, you have a long way to go. And so Jesus is working with me on that. So I probably should have maybe sat under their feet a little bit longer, because I wasn't good at that. Another thing, which, thinking about that compassion, is giving. My elders are givers. They would give you their last if they had, if you were in need, they gave you their last, whatever it was you need. They pulled together, to make sure that people in the community, in the neighborhood, had what they needed. And so I feel like a lot of our kids are going through things mentally, emotionally, and all of that because they have not had the opportunity to sit under their grandparents. Because let's all be honest, we move, we go and live, far, far away. And so the kids don't see their grandparents, and you just can't get it in FaceTime. You can't watch how they run their lives and how they function and how they do things, you know, when you don't live close to them. And so, as angry as I was when my parents moved to Arkansas, I now, of course, hindsight 2020, man. And so I now realize that was the one of the best things they did for me because I had this set of grandparents, my grandmother for a long time, and then we moved to Arkansas, and then I had my great grandmother, and I had my paternal grandparents, and I had some more elderly people because then we joined a small church and there was lots of elderly people there, and so they all think that you're their grandkids when you go to church. So that's a whole nother mirror talk right there. But that giving, they were givers. We are more hoarders. We are more, I gotta save. It's all about me. I gotta make sure, I have this in my account and my investment has to look like this. They invested in people. They invested in their community. They invested in the culture that surrounded them. They invested in their family. That's what they invested in. And so they were givers. And so that is another thing that you can learn. And so I kind of think about that whole fruit of the spirit thing, joy. My grandmother, I'm telling you, I did not realize until I was much older, not only how poor we were, but how poor my grandparents were also. But I'm telling you, happy, joyful people. My grandmother would walk around with those hands clasped behind her back, and it's funny how I see some of the great grandchildren doing it now, and I think, about her all the time because they don't even realize where they came from. But she'd walk around and she'd be singing. I mean, just singing her heart out. And I'm thinking, man, you live down here in this country dirt road and we're in this house with no running water. How can you be so joyful? But she was at all times full of joy. And so, they just had this sense of, I don't know, because I don't see it as much in the world today. And so, I want to revert back to, if I could be half the woman either one of my grandparents were, I would consider myself successful in life, just half, because they were amazing, strong, and not strong in the sense of, what we think of in society today, not strong in the sense of, putting those hands on somebody or running that mouth all the time or whatever the case may be, not that kind of strong. Strong in the sense of, I get teary-eyed when I talk about my grandparents because it's a whole other thing. Strong in the sense of persevering through things, dedicated to their family, loyal, walking the floor at night praying when they found out, one of the grandkids was sick or one of their kids was sick. I mean, you talking about some wailing and lamenting. You let one of those grandparents, one of their kids get, cancer or, like we're in this COVID right now. My grandmother by now would have prayed COVID away. They would have, that generation, COVID wouldn't stand a chance against that generation because they walked the floor all night long praying and calling on the Lord and, just the whole 9 yards. They've anointed, the whole world would be anointed, fooling with them. And so, they just had a difference. It just was something different about them. And so when I say, that mirror of wisdom, because they had a wisdom unlike, we have a lot of knowledge. We know a lot, We're techie, we can do all this, but we don't have that wisdom. Because that wisdom, one of the things it's based in common sense. And we all know common sense is not so common anymore. And so, kids who are not spending time with their grandparents or with, some of the older people, that either in their community, because now, God forbid, anybody say something to somebody else's kid. That whole village thing is lost in the now. And so I think kids have been shortchanged. I think this is why, we have as many emotional and mental, deficiencies in our children now. I think this is why, the coping skills are not there because we're not spending time where time should be spent. And so, mirror of wisdom, you know, I honor every older person who's spoken to my life, who prayed over me, who disciplined me. I got a lot of that. Who disciplined me, um, who saw in me what I couldn't see in myself, who understood that while I was out there being a ridiculous hot mess of a child, you know, they had a vision that there would be more to me than what met the eye at that moment. And so I'm very grateful for that. And so I say in this mirror of wisdom, you know, let your children spend some time with that older generation. Because, although no day is promised to anybody, you're missing out. You are missing out when you're not spending time with the elderly who have a sense of wisdom that we will never have. And so I honor all of my elders. I honor you for being you, for being wise, for being loving, for being kind, for being giving and compassionate, for being dedicated, for being loyal, for being prayer warriors, for speaking life into us, for all the things that you've sacrificed in order for us to be where we are now. I honor you. I thank you. And I'm appreciative. And so, get you a little wisdom in your life. Find the older lady on your block and start spending some time with her. Find a nursing home and maybe you can do some volunteer. I know it's COVID. You know what I mean. Find a nursing home. You can go to the hospital. You can, deal with some of the older generation at your church. You can do some volunteering. There's all kinds of ways that you can do it. But get you some wisdom in your life. Because if not, you're missing out. And so, as I started off saying so long ago, it is what it is, or we can make it what it should be.